Well, there we go. Hey, wow. That was unexpected. I thought I could fill the room with my voice before, but here we are. Well, again, thank you all for making time in this evening to come out. Appreciate it. If you don't know who I am, I'm President Pro Tem of Columbus City Council, Rob Dorans. And thank you for being here at City Council. We always like to say that City Hall is the people's house, and if this is the people's house, then City Council Chambers is the people's living room. So thank you for being here tonight to honor Labor Day, which is coming up next week, but also talking about not just honoring a day, but honoring a movement. Individuals that take the time to organize themselves here in this community and across the country to make their lives better and their communities better. And it could not be more of an appropriate place to do that. Columbus, Ohio, I think many of the folks in this room know, but if not, that the AFL-CIO was founded in this very city. And it's been a long time since we've had events here in Columbus that have been revolving around Labor Day, and we felt like it was time to bring some of those events back here in Columbus, especially as a time, and if any of you were checking out the news today, maybe you saw the same thing I did, where Gallup released their annual poll on the popularity of organized labor. And President Cropper, who I'm about to introduce here in a moment, is telling me I'm taking her talking points, so I'm going to move on very quickly. But one of the reasons that we're holding this event is that there are so many people in this country that view organized labor as something that's positive in our society, positive in our communities. And yet, while 70% of folks in this country say that they support organized labor and would like to form a union, only 12% of workers across this country are actually in a union. So many of that is because folks don't know how to actually organize a union themselves. And one of the reasons why we wanted to bring this kind of event here tonight was to actually sit down and talk with workers who have just gone through this process. Talk about why they did it, how others can do it. And oftentimes when you talk about these kind of things in the workplace, sometimes it can start out a little bit scary. And that's why we want to have labor leaders like them here today to talk about how they did this here in Columbus, Ohio. I did want to recognize a couple of folks that are here today before I introduce our speaker. One, my council colleague, Councilmember Nancy Diakauer. Senator Bill DeMora was with us earlier, but unfortunately he had to step out. I know we've got lots of labor leaders in the room, so I'm going to try to not count them all at once, but I did just realize I left out one elected official also in the room, Columbus City School Board member Sarah Ingalls. And I will be quick about my story because I think lots of you have heard it before, but I'm a very proud third-generation union member. I'm a member of the IBEW here in Columbus. My dad was a 41-year member of the IBEW. My grandfather was a member of the Plumbers and Pipe Fitters. And sort of family lineage or family lore at this point that I was born on a Saturday, and my dad was walking a picket line on a Monday. And that strike was about health care. So literally the first days of my life were defined by organized labor, fellow workers standing up with one another to make sure that they could have affordable health care. Literally that was my first days of life. And absent my dad having a union, absent my dad having workers that were committed to the labor movement, my family would not have had the economic stability that we had that allowed my sister and I to be the first of our family to go to college and have the ability to set down real stable roots to make sure that our kids have just as much of a chance at the middle class dream that we had. And that's why I think more families should be able to have that. And I think it's one of the things that's also lost. If you go back and look at the National Labor Relations Act, so the foundational piece of legislation that was passed in the 1930s that actually created the rights of workers in this country to form unions, in the preamble it states that it is the policy of the United States to encourage collective bargaining as a policy of this country. So when we talk about the reason why we're having this kind of celebration in Columbus City Council chambers is that it's not just on workers, it's not just on employers, but it's also folks in government creating the conditions for folks to be able to go out and organize their workplace and have that chance at the middle class dream that my family had. So thank you for being here today, and I have the utmost privilege of introducing our speaker before we get to our panel, President Melissa Cropper from the Ohio Federation of Teachers, who also serves as the Secretary-Treasurer of the Ohio AFL-CIO. And I'm going to say a couple really quick things and turn the mic over to her, but she started her career as a librarian in a school. And if you know anything about librarians, you should be both impressed and terrified of them at all times, because they're the folks that know everything is happening in a school. And she's brought that tenacity to the labor movement throughout her career. And she was first elected as president of the Ohio Federation of Teachers in 2012, and has since went on to also serve again as secretary treasurer of the Ohio AFL-CIO. And one of the things I love about President Cropper, and this is one of the reasons I asked her to be here today, is that at a time in which we have seen so much activism with workers across this country, the Ohio Federation of Teachers and other unions, some of which in this room, including AFSCME and others, have stepped up to bring their resources to the table to help workers organize. And it's very, very easy for folks to think that the labor movement is just about representing their current members. And it sometimes gets lost about making sure that other workers have the opportunity to have the same wages, working conditions, and benefits of folks that are already in unions. And President Cropper is somebody who has invested in organizing time and time and time again. And when she calls me and my phone goes off and I see her name on there, you know the old phrase, good trouble, I know that President Cropper is asking me to get involved in some good trouble. And I'm always very, very excited to see that number come up on my phone, because I know it's going to be about how do we do something for workers in this community. So with that, I'd love to turn the mic over to President Cropper.
Thank you very much for that introduction. First of all, as a librarian, I want to just, as a point of personal privilege, say that I was not your typical school librarian. I very much had a reputation for having one of the loudest libraries in the state, if not the country. So I guess maybe it was starting union activism even back then. I have a story of how kindergartners pulled a mutiny on me one day because they wanted me to read a certain book to them that I hadn't planned on reading. And it's a pigeon book. And they sat there and went, pigeon, 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 and created a ruckus until I caved. But I am very honored to be here tonight, and very honored, Councilman Dorans talked about how he answers the phone whenever I call. I would do anything for Councilman Dorans. He is a person who walks the talk. When he says that he believes in union organizing, he believes in labor, there's no question about it. And we have been successful with the organizing that we have done here in the Columbus area because of him and because of the rest of Columbus City Council. And can't reiterate enough how important it is that we elect people like Rob, people like Shannon, people like Nancy, the people that we have on Columbus City Council who have our backs in this organizing work. And it's not just having the backs of unions, it's like he said, it's having the backs of workers. That's what it's really about. They believe in workers' rights, and they believe that workers should have a voice in the workplace, and they put those beliefs into policy and practice. So thank you very much to you and to the rest of council for all that you have done to support our organizing efforts. As Councilman Dorans said, the Gallup just again came out with a poll. We've been watching these polls over the years, and again, union favorability is at 70% right now. Which is amazing. It's the second highest in 60 years. I mean, right up there with the first highest was just like a year ago, and they're right really close together in percentage-wise. So people in this country are hungry for unions. In addition to union favorability, there has been a 32% increase in the number of petitions that have been filed for new elections. And that was in July of this year. So just a little bit over halfway through the year, we'd already seen a 32% increase in this country in the number of elections filed. Number of strikes that have been happening, people willing to walk off the job to create better working conditions has more than doubled. But having said that, we're still, like Rob said, still at around 10 to 12% of people who belong in a union. And that is a problem that we need to address. That is why we need to continue doubling down on organizing. So we saw with the onset of COVID, or as we were coming out of COVID, that people really started rethinking their work-life balance. and really started thinking about what they wanted their working conditions to look like. Not that they had it before, but I think what became evident is that those people who had a union had better protections on the job. They were the ones getting the accommodations. They were the ones who had safer work environments. They were the ones who were able to leverage a voice to keep themselves safe, to protect their jobs, et cetera. So between wanting to have those protections and wanting to have more work-life balance, they came out of that really wanting to be a part of a union. I think that's why that union favorability went up. And so we started receiving lots of calls from people about forming a union. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I started in 2012. We did not have a history of doing a lot of organizing at the Ohio Federation of Teachers. And I'm not blaming that on my predecessors, because even in my first 8-9 years, we were not doing organizing. But once these calls started coming in, we said, and the calls started coming in, and I hired staff who were really organizers at heart. That makes a difference too. We started saying, hey, let's look more closely at organizing, and let's put some money into organizing. And so the first one we actually reached out to us that we were successful with was Worthington Public Library. And once we started working in that, we kept getting more and more calls, and we really made a decision that we were not going to say no to anyone who called us. At that point in time, regardless of size, regardless of constituency, if people wanted to organize, the only way that we were going to grow the labor movement as a whole was to make sure that all workers had a union. So while we are traditionally K-12 and some higher ed, and we have Franklin County Children's Services, we had some other groups reaching out to us. So we had charter schools. Now, we already did have a few charter schools. I know some people kind of balk at us playing with charter schools, but again, our belief is everyone has the right to quality working conditions. And the way that we make sure that charter schools are offering a quality education is to make sure that they treat their workers right, give them the good working conditions, and either force them to provide that quality and to take care of their workers, or to shut down. And so that's our goal, is to make sure that what's being offered there is quality, and that they are supporting their workers by giving them a good quality workplace. So we've done charter schools. We have organized Equitas Health Centers, so reaching out to the social workers who deal with the LGBTQ plus community. Kaleidoscope on the youth end of that. We are now organizing all faculty at CCAD, Columbus College of Art and Design, which includes adjuncts who in the public sector do not have bargaining rights in Ohio, but in the private sector we can offer those organizing rights. And so really, again, that philosophy of leave no stone unturned. Anyone who wants to organize, we're going to try to organize. We also respect that we are not always the right fit to organize. And so if someone comes to us and we think that there's another union that is a better fit for them, we channel them to that other fit. So we work very closely with AFSCME Council 8, who's also been doing an incredible amount of organizing in Central Ohio and across the state, and very supportive of their efforts also, as well as other unions. And so I think, again, it's highly, highly important as we move into this election season that we do make a commitment to making sure that all workers have an opportunity to organize, and that we are electing people who believe in that also. I mean, I'm sure that many of you saw recently that Elon Musk did an interview with Donald Trump, and they joked about, if a person goes on strike, you just fire him, right? That is not the type of person that we need in office at any level of our government. From sitting on a school board like Sarah does, to being on council like Rob, to being a state representative, a state senator, serving in Congress, being our president. We have to make sure that we are electing people who are representing workers and who understand that in order for our economy to thrive, in order for businesses to thrive, in order for our country to thrive, we have to have workers who have a voice on the job and who have their rights protected, the right to be able to have a voice in what happens at the workplace, the right to be able to strike if they need to strike to implement what they need to do, the right to determine their working conditions. So I am honored that we have some people to be here, and I'm very excited about listening to this panel of workers who have been actively organizing, some who have already successfully completing the organizing drives, others who maybe are still in the process. And I want to add to this, organizing, winning that election is the first step. The second step, as some of these people will tell you, is getting that first contract, which is often harder than actually winning the election. So while I've been talking about organizing locals, it's also highly, highly important that we make sure that we continue to support these workers after they win that election as they're trying to get their first contract. So with that, Councilman Doris, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, President Cropper. I want to invite our panelists to come up front, and we're going to have our worker panel. Come on up. So I'm just going to have everyone sort of go down the line, and if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, let us know who you are, where you work, and sort of what started you down the path of forming a union in your workplace. Margaret?
I'm Margaret Connect. I'm with Starbucks Workers United. I work at the store in Westerville, up north on the South State side. We were the second store in Columbus to unionize in early 2022. We have a little friendly rivalry going on with 88 Broad over here because they were the first and by a month. And so as far as what started me, it was kind of an accident. I actually got Starbucks, I started working there as a part-time job and told myself I wasn't going to get invested. And I'm here 4 years later as a union organizer. So yeah, it was a little bit of an accident, but a happy one at that. So.
My name's Jo Snyder. I used to work at the Wexner Center for the Arts, which is part of Ohio State. It's the art museum on campus. We organized over the course of a couple of years. We started in fall of 2021. We're actually coming up on that anniversary soon of our first meeting. Now I work as a staff organizer for Ohio Council 8, so I work with workers all over the state. I have been involved in a lot of cultural organizing, but that's not my only organizing that I do. But yeah, I joke that I got hooked on it and I went pro. So it's funny, we also have a friendly rivalry with the Columbus Museum of Art. We consider them our sibling union, but we went public with our organizing efforts a couple of months before they did, but just due to various external factors, they actually had their election a lot sooner than we did. So they're the first certified cultural worker union in Ohio, and we are, close behind. So similar sort of friendly rivalry there.
How's everyone doing? I'm Keyshawn Harper. I work at KIPP Columbus as a charter school here in Columbus. I work specifically at the high school as one of the school social workers. We have been doing this for a couple of years now. I think October of 2022, we went public, and we won our election that following May, and now since July of 2023, we've been doing contract negotiations. It's consisting of the teachers, social workers, paraprofessionals, and a couple other things that's kind of particular to there. But it's a K through 12 school that we represent everyone there. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Kyle Stoller. I'm a lawyer from the Franklin County Public Defender's Office. We began organizing in January of 2023. The main motivation was to have a voice, the same motivation I think everybody organizes for. It happened very quickly. We were able to garner a lot of support amongst the lawyers. We have about 90 lawyers. Our early on, we met with both Melissa and Luke. As Melissa indicated, she recommended we go with AFSCME, as you know, in solidarity. AFSCME had a contract already with the Cuyahoga County Public Defender. So we did that. We signed our cards quickly, and then things drug out from there. We were fought against pretty hard by our former director. We had to litigate a lot of things. We won, though, thankfully, and now we have been, we've just begun the process of negotiations. We've only had 2 meetings, and it's been an interesting experience. Melissa's absolutely correct. The organizing part is one thing, the negotiating part is another, but I'm optimistic that things are going to go well. It's going to take a while. That's where we're at.
Thank you. You know, one of the reasons I want to have, I think, many of the folks that are up here today is that I think a lot of times when people think about union members, they think about my dad. They think about an old white guy who's going to a power plant, you know, every day. They think primarily about blue-collar jobs. And when we think about, you know, there's lots of folks, obviously, in those industries that are unionized, and we want to make sure that folks continue to be unionized in those industries. But when you think about the wave of labor activism that has happened in the last several years, many of it has happened in places that people wouldn't think about right away. And I wanted to sort of ask you all, I think all of you are certainly a representation of folks in maybe industries or careers that people may have not associated with folks being in unions in the past, and whether or not that was tough to, you know, sort of think about, hey, how do I fit in this? Is this something that I can do? How do I talk to my coworkers about this? When, again, many folks have sort of that old stereotype in their head about what a union member is or who they look like. Margaret?
Yeah, I think that's actually very pertinent to Starbucks, because we actually have a joke in organizing that when you go into a new store to organize, you actually look for the young one with the tattoos and the different color hair, because it's almost like we have this whole generation of people coming up who are getting pretty, you know, fired up and radical about labor organizing, which is really wonderful to see, and it comes down a lot to education from there. But to speak to like the industries, I've been in food service for 10 plus years, and I was actually one of the skeptics at the beginning, being like, unions won't work in food service. There's too much turnover. There's too much, like, there were just too many hurdles with it. You kind of think of unions as something that somebody in a longer term position, you know, plumbers, trade workers, those sorts of things. Those are the people that you kind of expect to unionize because you have that unity. But the cool thing about food service is the unity is kind of already built in. It's a very collaborative industry. It's basically, you can only function with teamwork. And what I like to call unions is just fancy teamwork. It's just people coming together to work together and have a stronger voice. So like that was kind of already built into the structure. And yes, things like turnover and stuff can be difficult when it comes to especially organizing and getting your votes. But ultimately we've had, especially because it's such a young industry, particularly Starbucks, you have a lot of people that are coming in that are already just like fired up because they want to see those little incremental changes in society that might build to something that can work, you know, in their favor and help with things like, you know, food costs and housing costs. It all snowballs into something else. So it's kind of been nice to see it almost built in to Starbucks at this point. So.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. There certainly were other art museums already organized when we started. For example, Philadelphia Museum of Art, pretty famously, but also, I mean, places in New York City that have been unionized since like the 80s or 90s. So, you know, there was an established sort of precedent, but I think there definitely was that feeling, and we talk a lot about what we'll call like the passion tax, right? I'm sure some of you have heard that term, especially some of our teachers and public defenders and, you know, various others. You know, the idea that you should be so lucky to have this job, right? You should feel so lucky to work in the arts, to work with the public, to present this stuff, to work in the field that you studied for some of us. I studied art history, and the fact that I was able to get a job at an art museum was pretty, you know, point of pride, right? Because so many people would ask the question, like, what are you going to do with that? Well, I was doing something with it. So, you know, I think that the question that comes up for a lot of people when you're faced with that kind of messaging, that you should just feel so lucky to have this job, the question that you start asking is like, okay, well, Will my passion pay my rent? Will it buy me groceries? Will, feeling good about my job prevent me from getting sick and having subpar health care that then snowballs into mountains of debt? All of those questions start coming up. We also, at the Wexner Center for the Arts, we had an exhibition of artwork in early 2020, sort of pre-COVID shutdown, of the artist LaToya Ruby Frazier, who famously documented the Flint water crisis, along with various other sort of social justice moments throughout history, including the Lordstown shutdown. And so we had art in our galleries about, union members. We had interviews with union members, like printed out and put on the walls for people to look at as like an important, document of this sort of human endeavor. And I think that, that really planted a seed. Some of it was sort of a jokey ha-ha seed of like, wouldn't it be so funny if we unionized, like that, but just kidding, and then slowly as these things happen, it just stops being a joke and it becomes real. So, yeah, I think, you develop that sense of like, I do deserve this. I do deserve better. It just takes some practice to start thinking that way.
Yeah, I think at a charter school is a weird position because it's like, typically schools are unionized, but then like that's a no-no at charters, right? And I think we all understand like by design is built that way. Initially, like when I first came to KIPP, I had a conversation with someone that like, they always said like, hey, we have the power to do this, but like when the time comes, we'll know. And what ended up happening was, long story short, there was a significant change in PTO. And it just happened. You come to school, the first day of school, HR came, took away rollover days, took away a whole bunch of other things, and it got people upset. What I know in the past was people were talking about unionizing, but like, because we're such a big school, we have K through 12, different buildings, it just never took off. But because of that issue and how much it affected everyone, I think at that point, everyone was able to see that. And then luckily at the time, we just had a group of people that we talked to each other from the different schools. And like just that communication, we were hearing like, oh, like people feel this way here. This is going on here. Like, and over time, realizing that we all have the same issues. And despite the fact that like, yeah, typically charter schools aren't unionized, but like that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So that same person, when it became time, was like, hey, it's time. We need to figure this out. Luckily, OFT gave us a shot, and we had a hot conversation, and got to the point where we are now. But it's just been a fight. Some of their tactics are saying, like, the reason why we don't do things typically, as in, like, unions, is, like, because we're not a typical school. But then what we've been trying to preach and we've been trying to show, and, like, is that, like you said earlier, is like we're all with the same mission, right? We're doing this not because we're just trying to be selfish or whatnot, but like we're trying to do what's best for kids, and really driving home that message. But yeah, it's been a fight for sure. There's a lot of craziness that happened in between, but for me, I think I never really came into this thinking I was going to do this at all. But what impacted me most was just the teachers, and like, having teachers cry in your office about just some of the things going on. And it was like, for me at that point, it was just bigger than myself. So I was just like, all right, we're going to do this. This is going to be the fight and see how it goes. But yeah.
I love listening to these stories. It gets me pumped up. But for us, my family's the same as Rob's. I'm a third generation union person. My parents retired from factories. My grandpa retired from a factory. So it's in my blood as well. And when I told my parents about, hey, we're forming a union, it was unusual to them. They're supportive, of course, but they're like, hey, you're a lawyer. That doesn't make much sense, right? They're not. But internally, we were vaguely, when I say we, my colleagues, we were vaguely aware that other public defenders' offices had unionized across the country. It's funny because here we are, public defenders. What we do is fight for our clients, fight for the rights of marginalized people. every day. And then come back and continue to work hard and just pay the passion tax, deal with it, go along with what we think public defenders shouldn't get paid a fair wage, should just eat it and do your job. Shouldn't use that. We didn't use that same passion that we use for our clients for ourselves. So when we did, this, I'm ashamed to admit this, but we didn't realize that the Cuyahoga County public defenders had been unionized since like the 90s. And, they're a well-settled union, things work well with their management, things like that. So they're not particularly active. But when I learned that anyway, that was a big motivator to look more into that. See, hey, if they can do it, maybe we should. So yeah, it is unorthodox or unusual. It's exciting to see organizing in all of these different fields. And not only that, but the solidarity internally, but externally, when I drive by the Starbucks on 3rd and there are people out there, I'm honking and yelling. When it's exciting, and yeah, that's my answer.
Thanks, Kyle. So I think both Kyle and Keyshawn sort of hit the nail on the head a little bit, and I'm curious if other folks have things they want to share about. Oftentimes there's sort of specific animated events around, hey, maybe the light bulb sort of goes off for folks of, hey, this is maybe something I've heard about before, but is there sort of a thing that happened or, sort of a critical mass of folks in the workplace of finally saying, yeah, we should actually do this. I'm curious if there's any of you want to share, if anything has stood out to you in sort of this time period in which it went from, Joe, when you're talking about like, hey, we sort of joked around these posters that were, about union organizing in our museum, and it then became not a joke anymore at some point. If there's, I don't know if any of the rest of you have sort of these moments that sort of stand out to you as, hey, this goes from sort of this conceptual thing to, no, this is something we should really talk to one another about. This is something that the law allows us to do. This is something that could improve our workplace, could make this workplace better for everybody. All right?
COVID. It really was for us. I mean, if you followed the Buffalo campaign, which were the first stores to do it at the end of 2021, it really centered around COVID, because all of a sudden we were being told that we were essential workers that needed to risk our health and safety to be out with, inadequate PPE, serving the public. And it was a really scary time for everybody, because we really didn't know much about the COVID and everything like that. We're in one breath being told that we're essential workers, but in another breath, hours getting cut, benefits getting cut, those sorts of things. So it just didn't feel like we were being treated as essential. And that was a big conversation in Buffalo, and it was a big one here. And it was actually my co-organizer who came to us, at the end of 2021 after Buffalo certified, and he was like, we should do this. And that was when it stopped becoming a joke for us. Because I think everybody in food service at one point or another looks at each other and be like, walk out? Like, you guys ready? Because it's a stressful job, but it was almost like this expectation, like, it was almost a stereotype for food service. Like, you see it on TV, and like it's almost like dramatized of like the food service workers standing in the back crying in the walk-in, or like overwhelmed and getting yelled at by customers and stuff. And it just became like this accepted thing in the industry. And COVID just put it under like this massive microscope. And I really love being a part of this campaign, because it's starting to like really open up other people in food service to be like, well, just because it's the stereotype and the joke about our industry, it shouldn't be that way. Like when people are like, well, you should just, you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, why should you get a living wage? Because you're a human who deserves a living wage. So like, it was, yeah. So I think other people have touched on it, that COVID just like put everything into like sharper perspective, especially for the food service industry.
Yeah, I would agree with that, sort of same precipitating event. And I like the language you're using too about how it sharpened the issues that were already in existence, right? Like it didn't create anything new necessarily. It just highlighted, pay disparity and poor health care, limited PTO, all of those things. Similarly, it's so interesting because we have so many different classifications represented at the WEX. So we have some front of house workers who were brought back very, very early. I think June 2020 early. So pre-vaccine, everybody's still wearing those like cloth face masks that don't do anything. No understanding of how, how this, virus spreads and affects the body. Like none of that information. And really we're just let loose, sort of like, okay, go back into the galleries, go sit there for a couple hours. Maybe someone will come in, maybe they won't. Maybe they'll yell at you if you ask them to put a mask on. Maybe they won't. Like it's, while some of us, myself included, for quite a while, were able to work from home. So there was even that disparity, among our workforce, where some people could work from home and some people couldn't. We also experienced, like I think a lot of sectors did, layoffs and furloughs and reduced hours and all of that. The WEX laid off, I believe, 6 positions in the fall of 2020, which doesn't sound like a lot, maybe, but that's about 10% of the full-time workforce at the WEX. And they were, people who were sort of fixtures in the staff. I mean, there were several people who were very close to retirement, which felt, of course, very pointed, right? So I think that, that really similarly, kind of sparked something in people's brains at the WEX of like, all this talk of shared sacrifice, but who is really doing the bulk of the sacrificing, right? And what does that look like? And is there a way that we could make our voice heard and have input in practices that could be more equitable, could be safer, could be better researched, could be any number of things, because I think there's a lot of intelligence in workers and a lot of we know what we need to do our own jobs, right? Like we are the experts in our own jobs in many ways. And so I think we're the ones doing them. Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, going through a crisis like that did affect everybody, but affected everybody differently, really starts making you think about, okay, what is my voice? What is my outlet when we're in crisis? For a lot of us, there was none. It was just sort of take whatever came down through this hierarchical sort of decision-making process. So, do you all want to?
So certainly we had years and years of not having a voice and some real discontent, but there absolutely was a tipping point, and appropriately enough, my colleague Andy can understand this. It was an email from our former director, notoriously communicated in horrible emails. But, that we had, a couple of people had talked about it. It was an abstract notion. We knew about Cuyahoga County, but there was an email. It was a jumbled mess, word salad that made no sense. There was then a reply, a very professional and kind one from a colleague asking for some clarification. The reply to which was just extreme disrespect and clear disdain for us to even wonder about the means of our employ. And it was so clear in that email that we didn't have a voice. That was the tipping point for me. That I read that email and was enraged. And I have one other colleague, Chris Cannell, who's a passionate union person, and he and I had the most kind of concrete conversations at that point. And after reading that email, he and I talked, we have to do this. We absolutely have to do this. And saying it out loud to one another made us sort of accountable to, we're doing this, right? So, that, it did take that sort of tipping point to make it real, and then to speak it out loud to another serious person who is like, we're going to make sure we do this. We're going to hold one another accountable, and we're going to take the first steps. And that, as Rob indicated, can be very scary, and it was absolutely scary. That's for sure.
So I had a question specifically for Joe. So you mentioned earlier you went from helping to form a union in the workplace, and then you went professional, right? So now you're a professional union organizer. with AFSCME Council here in Columbus, helping to educate other workers about how they can do this in their workplace. And I'm just curious for you, like what lessons from the WEX have you taken into this next career to help empower other folks in the workplace? What stands out to you from your experience as someone who went through this firsthand and now is helping to, again, give the tools to other workers to be able to do this in their workplace?
Yeah, I think, it gives you a lot of credibility, first thing, because I think that it's so hard. It is so difficult. It is so scary, and it feels so impossible because it requires you to take this leap of faith that feels otherworldly, right? And so being able to say that, well, we did it, and I am no more qualified to start a union than you are because I didn't go to school for it. I don't have any experience in it. I didn't at the time, maybe I don't want to say that too, in case my boss is listening and says, wait, I thought you had experience. That's right. You know what? I'm part of our staff union. I'm good. But yeah, so, that sense of like, I can do it, so can you is a huge thing. Also just knowing like what it actually takes. I think that on paper, you can throw out abstract numbers. Like you want to get to 70% support before you drop cards. Okay. Like what is that? What does 70% support mean? Like, could you just like sitting in this room gauge if there's 70% support right here in this room right now, right? Like it takes some digging and some hard conversations that I think a lot of us are sort of trained not to have, right? You are trained not to talk about your pay. You are trained not to talk about problems you might be having at work. Anybody having any kind of problem with like unfair discipline or anything like that is just treated as like, oh, well, they're a bad worker, so it's their fault. It's that kind of thing. It's so difficult, I think, for people to imagine that it could be better, right? So that is absolutely, crucial. And I think like being able to communicate to people that it really is just about those conversations, and it really is just about, forming relationships with people. It sounds so simple and it sounds so like canned. And I'm sure that, some of the workers on campaigns that I'm working on right now are rolling their eyes like, oh, she just wants us to talk to people. She just keeps saying like, just talk to people. And I'm like, well, that is the tool that you use, right? And I'm not just saying that because I'm an organizer, these are very much my experiences and my views, and that is really the only way to do it, is to talk to people and really have those conversations and listen to them. People just want to be heard more than anything else.
Thank you. I was curious if any of the rest of you, if someone came up to you right now and said, hey, I know you're involved in this organizing drive. We're thinking about doing this in my workplace. What's the biggest piece of advice that you would give them based upon your experience?
Yeah, you seemed like
Yeah. I mean, it's like what Joe said, like communication is key, right? Like there's a lot of things that like, what ended up happening for us is like, as the more we communicated, the more we realized what was going on. And the more we realized like, oh crap, we really definitely need to be doing this, right? Because people are so conditioned to keep things to themselves. Okay, maybe everyone else is having the same treatment. One thing that came out was talking about maternity leave. The year before we organized, we had a bunch of teachers go out on maternity leave. The next year we had a couple and a few, but then we realized that like not everyone's leave was like the same or like being utilized the same, or like the policy wasn't being implemented in the same way. But people wouldn't know about that because they wouldn't talk to each other. And I think beforehand too, like I said, before we actually organized, there was points in times where people thought about organizing, but like never went, for us, outside the school, right? So like the high school stayed with the high school, middle school stayed with the middle school, elementary, and then pre-K. And that just made people think like, okay, maybe everyone else is doing fine. If you are going to organize, I would say like talk to the people first, like talk to everyone, gauge what's going on, because what you may find is that people do have the same problems and the same issues, but we're just not talking to each other about it. And then the other thing I would say is like, when you go for it, like when you make that decision, like really go for it. Like you can't like half do it. A lot of times especially when we started organizing, there was like news news interviews, just a whole bunch of, or like putting your name out on like a post, like, or like a flyer, is not going to get done until like people can see that you're invested and that you're willing to do this and you're willing to put your name out there and you're willing to put everything out there. And then people usually gravitate towards that. So I would say communicate it with everyone, but then show people too that like you really mean this and like you're putting everything out there.
Yeah, the first bit of advice that I would give anyone is do it. Organize your workplace. That's absolutely the first thing I would say. And obviously communication is huge. To add, I mean, those are the things that I would say. But to add on to that, I think what helped us, and we organized pretty quickly. I think what helped us, it was that we had a small core of folks who represented different parts of our organization. We have different units within, but also there was varying levels of experience, just a diverse set of folks. So somebody who's been there for 17 years, like myself, or 20 or 25 years, along with somebody who's been there for 1 year or 2 years. But for those younger folks to see, well, these more seasoned veterans have some skin in the game here, and they're willing to do it. I have the courage to do it, and also young people are ready, and it's awesome. We have a critical mass of young folks in our office that I love, and they have, they follow me and I follow them. We work together really well. They inspire me. We inspire one another, and it's an awesome generation. We wouldn't have been able to do it without that kind of critical mass of young folks who are passionate about organizing and about being better humans, and it's exciting.
Well, I'll be really quick. Yeah. Yeah. I think, maybe a little less flashy and, like cool sounding, but like document everything, like genuinely, like, because someday you might, let's talk about like naming conventions for your files. Let's go. No, but I think that, someday you might get asked to sit on a panel and you're thinking, oh, when was that? Like, what year was that even? Like, I just, luckily at the WEX, there's somebody who has like the most, genuinely almost photographic memory. And that's such a blessing to have that, from somebody who can pull out these names and dates and, oh yeah, we had this conversation with this person and this member of the public reached out to support us, That's a great resource that you will not always have. I think, document all the things, however you need to organize everything. It could be a big file folder. It could just be like a Google Drive, something like genuinely just, take notes at meetings, take pictures of everything, just genuinely, hold on to that because it's something really cool and really important that you might want to look back on later.
I'll piggyback off of that. It's cool and important, but also we had a very aggressive union busting campaign, so it also is a lot of protection. So yeah, so that's definitely important. This actually, the people approaching us actually happens a lot in our campaign because, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a lot of Starbucks in Columbus. I actually think we have the highest concentration in the state. So this actually has been happening a lot, especially since they agreed to come to the bargaining table where like our store in 88 Broad, and we've had several stores, mostly in northern Columbus, that have been a part of the campaign for several years, and we've become like organizers for the campaign because that's us reaching out to them. And honestly, through it all, one of the things, I don't know if this is advice or just like pointing it out, that a lot of the times you're already having the organizing conversations without knowing it. At least in my industry, I know it's different across industries because we have the opportunity to stand around and talk with each other a lot, and there's plenty to complain about. So it's already kind of built in when you're like just talking to your coworkers and you're talking like airing grievances, talking about things like PTO and maternity leaves and hours and all of those things. It's really, you're already having those conversations. It just comes down to how do you direct them in the right way. And that was what we learned throughout the campaign, was just how to like make them more intentional so that they reach a goal. And I think that that's that turning point that everybody gets to where it's like, okay, we were just chatting about it and now we got to do it. And I can't reiterate more what you said. Just do, like, when you decide to do it, just do it. Like, you need to, especially if you have aggressive union busting, you kind of just need to like collectively make that decision and just go for it, because, you know, especially in like retail and food service like us, capitalism does not like unions. So they are, you know, it doesn't really matter the personal viewpoints of some people in the higher levels. It's just, it's against what capitalism or what they're trying to do, which is their bottom line. So we just had to be prepared for that.
So I also want to add on a less serious note that it's also pretty cool to have a great logo, and the Franklin County Public Defenders Collective has, I think, the best logo out there. If you haven't seen it, it's the duck, which I think comes from the softball team. Yes. So that. Yeah, it's a fun duck, so get some good branding. I'm curious, so some of you have went through this recently, many of which are still working towards their first contract, and I think picking up on what Margaret just mentioned about so often as a culture in the United States, our relationship to work is a bit warped from time, where we're sort of trained to think that again, I think a lot of you mentioned, I think, maybe Kyle, about the passion tax, where people should feel lucky or fortunate to have the job they have. And oftentimes when you think about how having a union in which you have more of a voice in your workplace, like, can change that relationship with work. And I'm curious if any of you feel different about your work now, having gone through this process, and if so, you know, how's this affected your relationship with your coworkers, yourself, your relationship to sort of work itself?
Well, so we didn't get like passion taxed. We almost got like you should be lucky sort of situation, because Starbucks does provide really good benefit packages for like part-time workers and stuff like that. And, you know, they have a lot of more progressive benefits. A lot of those benefits are tied to hours, though. That's the less known thing. They advertise that they have great benefits, but then often use the hours to be able to undercut those. And so, like, especially, I mean, when Howard Schultz was still at the helm, unfortunately, he said a couple things when the union movement started that was about, like, well, we treat our workers really well. Why would they ever want to do this? And so we got that a lot. And honestly, in the end, it really just unified us more, because it was like, it's kind of an out of touch. It's a very removed perspective to say something like that, because you may treat us better, but like overall, we're still not earning a living wage. Our benefits are dependent upon our hours, which you can control at any point. You can take away any of these benefits at the drop of a hat if you feel like it. And so it was, you know, at least for our store, it was frustrating to hear those sorts of things, because it was like, one of the things we always says is if we hated Starbucks, we wouldn't try to unionize it. We wouldn't try to make it better to stay. So we want to stay. We want to keep working for the company, because a lot of the times there are a lot of good things about working for that company, but we want to work with them, because often, like, the big thing at the beginning of the campaign was that Starbucks often says that they leave an empty seat at the table at the boardroom. It's like the board members, and then the empty seat is supposed to represent the partners and their voice. But our question was, why is the seat empty? You know, like, why don't we have someone there? So you know, it's like they're coming right up to the line, but not, you know, they're like, we want to include you, but not really. So yeah, like so that was like a very unifying thing for us in the store, was just like, well, you know, you say that you want this, so okay, fine, we'll do it. And, you know, it was unifying on the store level. It is frustrating on a corporate level, but I also, you know, we understand it from, you know, the bottom line point of view. It's just, you know, we're humans, not bottom lines. So, like, we just kind of went for it, I guess.
That feels like a part of like a comedy stand-up. Like, that doesn't even sound real. They have an empty seat to represent the workers' voices. Like, do you hear yourselves? Like, yeah, I think that, you know, it's a really empowering experience. It's also very frustrating, like you're kind of pointing towards. It's also, I mean, my relationships with my fellow workers at the WEX were completely and utterly changed because of the work that we did with the union. I think, the bonds that we formed, the friendships that we developed, some of those people became like family. People that I had never talked to and thought I had nothing in common with turned out to have a lot of the same concerns that I had, we're not so different, right? So that is, it's a little mushy, it's a little feelingsy, but it is one of the huge things that changed for me in my life and in my work was that sense of connection with my fellow workers. And you just can't manufacture that, and I think when you really spend a lot of time sitting with somebody and hearing what their concerns are and what they care about and why they care about it, right? That changes you and it changes your relationships to people. And I think it just, I don't know, I've seen it, and now being on staff, I have seen it from the outside, right? I've seen it change people and seen people go from shy and reserved and mind my own business, stay on my own lane to becoming these amazing powerhouses, and it's such a privilege to watch that happen over time. And I just think that there's really nothing like it. Not to romanticize it because yes, it is completely frustrating and it just sometimes feels like you're banging your head against a brick wall. But, I think that aspect of it just can't be understated.
Yeah. I think for me, or I would say for a lot of our organizing / bargaining committee is everyone, or at least hopefully everyone, or most people go into education feeling like they can impact students, right? Impact maybe their classroom or maybe the student body. But with this and through this, I kind of look at things a bit more I can do more, right? There's more things that we can impact now that we work with management, right? That we have a say of all these things that we see that are going on that's wrong, that we can make better. We're hey, we have an opportunity now. Before it'd be okay, that's just how it is, keep it pushing. But I think now is I'm seeing things and now we're thinking about what can we bring to the table, what can we change, what can we extend to leadership, to admin, to be hey, we see this, we recognize this as a problem, and we want to help fix it. And I think that's one of the biggest things we've been trying to do. I think we've been doing a good job of in negotiations. It's we see issues that we want to help you guys with, and we feel we have some of the solutions. If not, we have other sides you may not think about. So just for me, with the relationships with the workers, it's just they come to me about different things now, and I feel way more attached and way more, I guess, have way more of a say in what's going on and way more of a emotional connection to the people. And I just can't, I went in thinking I would have something just because I'm doing social work, but it's just so much more deep. And then now we're affecting we were affecting lives before, but not only the lives of students, but the lives of the teachers, the social workers, everyone there. Not only now, but because we're making a contract that never existed before, we know people coming in will have these same things for years and years. Yeah.
They said it all pretty perfectly, but I am shamelessly mushy and emotional, and I will romanticize it, Joe. It did change our office. It revolutionized our relationships. It changed me as a person, I feel like. We were while we supported one another, of course, we were sort of siloed into different units. We were also sort of siloed into our own very difficult jobs. And particularly during the organizing phase, it is extraordinarily exciting to come together and to say, to be able to say openly the things you kind of whispered to one another behind closed doors. That is extraordinarily empowering. And it really has changed. We're getting into the meat of the work, the negotiating part. And that's where the romance sort of wears off a little bit. But nonetheless, those bonds that were created during the organizing part, keep us going. And the fact that we had to share, we had to make sure everyone was heard, and we learned how to communicate better with one another. It has helped us now that we're transitioning into the more difficult phase of negotiating. As far as affecting my own work-life balance, I'm still working on that.
I think it's so interesting because oftentimes you'll hear employers say, we're a family, so everyone needs to sort of sacrifice for the bottom line. And I think one through line, you all created conditions to create a family of workers that wasn't about sacrificing for the bottom line. It was about supporting one another and supporting families. And I think that's really something to uphold, that when I talk to folks that go through these kinds of drives, this is oftentimes you hear a version of this, and it's really beautiful to hear from all of you that you had that sort of experience where you learn so much more about and are so much more connected to the folks that you go to work with every day because of the experience. So thanks for sharing that. Last thing I want to ask all of you, I think all of you to some degree have been part of a somewhat public-facing organizing drive to some degree. Typically, when we think about what that means is that I think, Kyle, you mentioned earlier about, driving by one of the Starbucks downtown and making sure you're honking when they're outside. And I think, there's that, again, sort of stereotypical thing that I love doing that myself. But what would you tell, community members, elected officials, other people that ways that if you hear about an organizing drive, you hear about folks that are working through a contract, things that you would suggest that they do to support those efforts to help to make a difference?
Yeah, ours has been a little bit public, hasn't it?
Yes.
Just a little. For our campaign particularly, a lot of it comes down to public shows of support. Especially because we do serve the public, it makes a difference to Starbucks to know that the public is supporting unionized stores. So, going to unionized stores, which I know it's kind of hard to tell nowadays because they're popping up everywhere and we don't exactly fly a banner. But if you find out that you're in a unionized store, we always encourage you to maybe change your name on the drink to Union Strong, just those little things. If you hear of an event, just showing up. If it's a leafleting event, if it's we call them sip-ins, it's the same thing as a sit-in. We're just playing with the wordage a little bit, which is just a community outreach program where you come in and you chat with the union members. If you ever hear about those, just showing up is a huge thing for our campaign because it shows the community support and it really strengthens our movement and our voice for them to know that the people that they're serving also support us, not just the workers.
Yeah, I think, maybe you experienced this too, because we have sort of public-facing experiences there. We had people asking us, should we boycott? Did you get that? People would say, should I not go to the WEX? When we were talking about unionizing. And it was no, you should still go. You should still go and support unless someone is actively calling for some kind of boycott or something like that. For the most part, management will hit that line so hard that a union's going to destroy our bottom line, right? And so the last thing you want is for somebody to just stop coming and supporting because they think that that's what the workers want. It's usually not, unless that, again, is the specific ask. I think, responding on social media, commenting, liking, sharing, whatever. If there's petitions, we had a couple of petitions at the WEX, and I don't know if, the higher ups at Ohio State read the entries, but I did, as a worker. I read all of those. I know, all of the people who signed those and wrote messages of support, including artists, including people, public officials, anybody who signed that, I know, and that was hugely, helpful because the management or whoever will try to make you feel alone, right? Will try to make you feel like you are being unreasonable, like you are trying to stab them in the back, or that you are creating this contentious relationship. And so flooding it with that positivity and support and knowing that, people do understand what it is that you're actually trying to do, which is grow and strengthen and support, that makes a huge difference because morale can get pretty low when you're being told that you're, scum of the earth for doing this, you know what I mean? So yeah, and I think honestly, find out what the specific needs are for each campaign because it's going to look different depending on the kind of workplace, the needs at an art museum are going to be different than the needs at a Starbucks versus a school. All of those things are, those workers might have different needs for their campaigns. So actually find out what that is before you just jump in with both feet. But support is appreciated. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to add other than that. I mean, the tension is key, right? They want this stuff to go away. They want people to like forget about it. They want people to forget about that there's an issue. But just if you see something, repost it. If there is like a thing to sign it. If you're, a public official or whatever, like blow it up, show it, like show that this is going on, and not be afraid of saying like, hey, this is what they're doing. This is their fight. Help support that. And I think that goes a long way.
I don't have anything to add other than be warned that on social media, I do that all the time. The algorithm figures out quickly that you are a hardcore socialist that wants to fight for the rights of workers. So that's all my social media feed is.
Well, I think to summarize, if nothing else, I think one thing when you hear from workers like this is to ask them, what do they need? Don't decide for folks what they need, ask them and do that. That's the way that folks can, I think, everyone sort of spoke to be supportive. I did just want to open it up and see if anyone had anything closing that they want to say either about their experience or talk about what they're feeling like's going on here in Central Ohio and sort of across the country as, both President Cropper and I talked about unions being incredibly popular, but at the same time, we see the percentage of folks in unions not matching that amount of folks that are in them. So I don't know if anyone from the panel wants to opine about that or any thoughts before we close it out tonight?
I mean, I'll just say that Columbus is hot right now, at least in our campaign. We've doubled, at least, I think, in the size in like the past year, which is pretty crazy. Honestly, the biggest thing I can encourage anybody to do is just talk about unions. Like, demystify them. Because I think that is one of the biggest things that's standing in the way when we talk about the 70% versus the people that are actually doing it, is it's just this very mysterious thing to some people. There's negative stereotypes around it, and it just comes down to like demystifying it, because it's really, at the end of the day, it's not really that complicated. Like I said, it's just teamwork. It's, coming together. Like, that's basically all it is, and I think it's sometimes intentional to make it seem way more complicated than it is. So that would be my thing. Just talk about unions. Even if you're not planning on starting one, just talk about them.
I think if people are thinking about unionizing, I think that was the question, you can call me. Or any number of organizers across the state, depending on your sector and, all of that. But, we are out here, you are not alone. You're not the first person to ever think of unionizing. Other people have done it. There are best practices. There are hot tips. There are other unions that you can connect with. It's about solidarity and it's about that connection. So I think reach out, honestly. There's no harm in talking to a union even. Like talk to your coworkers first, absolutely. But I think taking that step and actually reaching out to a union to start making it real can feel really intimidating for people, but you might as well. Like, it's not gonna, if it doesn't work, that's okay. Maybe there's another time to do it, but you might as well take that first step because you never know.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much the same thing they said. Like, the one thing is, like, if you have that, like, aching in your pit of your stomach, if you feel like this is wrong, or whatever the situation in your school is, or wherever it is wrong, and you feel super afraid of doing it, that means you probably need to be the one doing it, right? Because everyone else may be having that feeling, and it's, that number, 70%, feel that way, but then, like, when it comes to actually taking that step, it gets smaller and smaller. So take that leap. Maybe you don't have to do it by yourself, but like you said, talk to somebody. If you have that gut feeling, listen to it and take that leap.
I just want to say thanks, Rob, for inviting us. Thanks for recognizing that labor is important. I also want to say thanks to Luke Ward, our awesome organizer. Thanks. And to Steve. Stop shaking your head, Luke. As I look right here, and Sarah, started, we had some conversations before I even reached out to unions. Jamie, Melissa, thank you for existing labor community so that when we took that leap of faith, you were there to catch us and support us. And it's pretty awesome that you all are here. In closing, with regard to what I would tell someone on the fence, call Joe, call me. Don't be afraid. It's terrifying. And I understand that. But you have protections. You have rights. Reach out and start to talk to someone. Talk to folks that you're with. but don't be afraid. There is support here in this community, in the law, and in the labor movement generally. That's it.
Well, I want to thank you all, but I do want to sort of make one point before we sort of close out, is that so often you hear folks say, well, we don't need a third party in here to complicate the workplace, right? But you know what a union is? It's the workers. It's Kyle, it's Keyshawn, it's Joe, it's Margaret, it's their coworkers. There's no third party. It's the folks in that workplace that decide to come together to create that union. And I think that's something that's, when we talk about demystifying organized labor, I think that's one of the biggest things that many folks in our community don't realize, that a union is nothing more than a bunch of workers deciding to get together, and rather than try to get the best deal that they can get on their own, it's about what is best for the collective. And individually, you have less power than a collective has, and that's the whole idea behind collective bargaining. And when you sit up here with folks like this who've done, I think you've all heard from them that they've done something that's scary and unknown and hard. And to sit up with them, these are very, very, very strong and passionate folks. And one of the reasons we want to have this event here tonight was for folks in our community, both here with us tonight, but also those watching online, to see that a union is these people sitting right in front of me. That it's not scary. It's just normal people who wanted to make the workplace better. So thank you for doing that. And if everyone could give them a round of applause. Again, I want to thank everyone who came out here tonight, either in person or virtually, to watch this. I hope we all learned something, and I know I did. And want to, again, thank so many labor leaders that are here, and for not only what they do every single day to help represent their members right now, but to represent workers in the future. And I think you look across this room, not only folks that are up here, but we've got people in this room from the Columbus Education Association that just organize substitute teachers here in Columbus, right? We have public sector workers here that every single day go to work to keep our city literally running, that absent them, we would not have the city services we have, not only in Columbus, but across this county and across this country. And to ensure that those folks have the ability to organize to make sure that they're well paid and treated fairly in the workplace, we would not have the city services that we have. I look around and see friends from the building trades that are organizing people literally every single day in the construction industry that has a notorious history for wage theft and treating people without dignity, and making sure that more people have access to a living wage and health care and benefits long term to help find that economic stability for their families. So I'm excited about where Columbus is in this moment. I'm excited what the labor movement is in this moment. And it was important for me, given all that energy that we're feeling right now in Columbus, to have an event like this where not only we get ready for Labor Day here coming up next week, but to remind folks that Labor Day is more than just a day off work, more than a day of having a barbecue with friends. It's about honoring the past sacrifices of workers, but also honoring the sacrifices of literally people who are doing this right now, and to show how more people in our community can do that. So appreciate everyone being here tonight, and happy Labor Day.